I will be reading my negative manuscript speech final draft and from my two sisters. All right, now I will begin. Methane gas is a huge problem we face as global warming continues, but while we're reducing the environment's harm, we're also wasting the energy, says Yogesh Suradharanith, who is an MIT chemistry professor who was interviewed in an article, A New Way to Harness Wasted Methane. Because I agree with Professor Yogesh's assessment on methane gas, I am negating the argument that the best course of action to curb methane gas would be for the USDA to implement a limit on the amount of methane a farm can produce. First, I will be giving a brief reminder of what the affirmative was arguing. Next, I will discuss the improper handlings of manure and methane gas in the agricultural industry and why I disagree with the problem stated in the affirmative speech. Lastly, I agree that there is a problem and I will put forth a new cure to the problem. First, I will be giving a brief reminder of what was argued in the affirmative speech. My affirmative speech noted that the solution to helping curb methane released into our atmospheres would be to limit the amount of methane a farm can produce each year. By arguing to limit the amount of methane a farm can produce, the methane released by farms could be measured and kept track of. This would then let them find ways to limit methane productions in certain areas. The affirmative speech also argued that while limiting methane from farms would be a good start, the people, the consumers, would also be informed of the cost of producing the product, which in this case would be livestock and especially beef. So they can lower the demands of the products, which would then be more plant-based diets to help lower methane release. I disagree with this solution in the affirmative for various reasons. Methane produced in farms are not properly disposed of and utilized to their full extent. According to Elizabeth Rosenthal from the New York Times on December 3rd, 2008, she writes, in Denmark, by law, farmers now inject manure under the soils instead of laying it on top of fields, a process that enhances its fertilizing effects, also reducing odor and also prevents emissions from escaping. By contrast, in many parts of developing world, manure is left in open pools and lathered on fields. By having these laws that make farmers inject manure into the soils, they become more aware of the consequences that come from their products if improperly handled, such as the release of methane into the atmosphere. While the previous affirmative speech solution was to limit the methane production each farm can produce, methane gas is very hard to measure and record while they're being produced in these farms. In addition, Henry Fountain, a writer for the New York Times, on October 21st, 2020, writes, on hot summer days, the manure can become too dry and dusty, and coupled with the panhandle winds results in a brown cloud that can greatly affect air quality locally. Although there have been improvements on waste disposal in the agriculture industry over the years, the example above is a great indication of what is usually occurring when manure is improperly taken care of. The example of the brown cloud demonstrates that improper treatment of manure on these farms, as manure waste and methane emissions in that manure isn't taken care of, and instead left out in the open to ferment in the winds. Therefore, by not properly taking care of the manure, its methane emissions, it continues to seep into our environments, affecting the world around us. While ignoring proper disposal of methane is a bad thing, there are ways to use methane gas to produce energy instead. Since methane is being produced in these farms, why not generate energy using methane gas as more effective in trapping heat than carbon dioxide or CO2? Although most farms just leave their agricultural waste to decompose naturally, Green Mountain Dairy Farm in Vermont, USA has managed to find a way to repurpose manure into something more beneficial to them and their county. According to Katie Zizima from the New York Times on September 23, 2008, she wrote, the farm is a part of a growing alternative energy program that converts the methane gas from cow manure into electricity that is sold to the power utility grid. By repurposing the manure from cows that contain methane in it, they managed to solve an energy problem by converting the heat from methane so it can create electricity. In addition, Tim Post, a writer for NPR News, on June 27, 2008, wrote an article about Jerry Jennison's Central Minnesota dairy farm, stating that Jennison can still use the manure for fertilizer after it's run through the process because it no longer contains methane. It's lost much of its odor and doesn't emit as many greenhouse gases. The process stated in this quote is a series of pipes that transfer the manure into a motor, which then absorbs the methane that bubbles from the top of the manure to create and generate electricity. Therefore, not only could there be a new source of renewable energy for farmers and their counties to use, they still benefit by being able to use a processed manure as fertilizer that has now been processed, losing the harmful methane in it. Now that I have established a new cure, let me conclude this speech. First, I gave a brief reminder of what my affirmative speech was arguing, which is that their methane is bad. Next, I discussed the improper handlings of manure and methane gas in the agriculture industry and why I disagree with the problem stated in the affirmative speech in the first place. And lastly, I went over a new cure to the previous answer I gave in the previous affirmative speech. I disagree that the best course of action to curb methane gas would be for the USDA to implement a limit on the amount of methane a farm can produce, as it can instead be used as an energy generator instead to produce clean electricity for farms and counties to use. Methane is an unlikely source of energy, which can now be one that could power a county near you.